Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Outside Looking In, the podcast series wherein I talk to 29 people about their team and what they think about the Raptors so that you, the listener, get to understand kind of the consensus on the Raptors from the outside looking in, i.e., the name, and so that you slowly, gradually learn about the league at large so you know everything you need to know before the season starts. Today, we have Joe Viray, who is, as far as X's and O's go, as far as breakdowns, analysis go, I know a lot of people love when I have Caitlin Cooper on this podcast. Joe, in the very same vein, somebody who's just tremendous at doing it, tremendous at kind of communicating the more complex parts of the game to fans. That's his specialty. And he does a Golden State of Mind and SB Nation. Okay, Joe, first thing, how you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I'm actually just trying to wean off on the high of covering the World Cup. That was an experience. And, FIBA basketball, it's a whole different beast. And, I love FIBA basketball, the joy of covering it. But you know what? I'm ready. I'm all ready for NBA basketball because, that's my bread and butter. I think that's your bread and butter too. If you're an NBA fan, there's a lot to be excited about, a lot of movement in terms of teams, in terms of coaching staffs. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get to talk about that with the Raptors later on. Personnel, especially the Warriors, there's one big name that just got added. And yeah, I mean, I know everyone says that, every new NBA season is going to be interesting, but I feel like this one is going to be especially interesting, in the light of, the in-season tournament, the new player resting rules, and yeah, just, there's no clear-cut favorite. Like the Nuggets, you could say, are the favorites, but I think we're far removed from the super team era where Warriors with KD again this year, Warriors with KD again the next year, and anything can happen. So, I'm just excited to begin the new season.
Something I want to talk about, and just to indulge a lot of the Canadian listeners who are kind of tuning in, we had really great coverage from Alex Adams, who was in overseas covering the FIBA World Cup. He didn't go to the Philippines for that aspect of it, but you got to cover Shea up close and personal. Any highlights from covering Canada's Golden Boy in what was their best finish ever?
Oh, it was just really, really great to see him in person actually do his thing. TV doesn't do justice, like in terms of what he can do on the court, just the shift in pace, the change of direction, his craftiness, his handle, and just how he manipulates the court in all sorts of ways. Where, for example, in the Team USA game, the bronze medal game, no matter what, like which defender they threw out at him, whether it's Cam Johnson, whether it's Mikal Bridges who got his ankle broken, whether it's Tyrese Halliburton, they tried switching, they tried dropping, they tried kind of, that soft hedge, that level of the screen coverage. And, Shea found answers to every one of them. They blitzed him, and then he found the open man, and the open man, more often than not, turned out to be Dylan Brooks, who had the tournament of his career. He shot better than Steph Curry numbers in FIBA play, and like of course the narrative is going to be like why didn't Team USA do this and do that? Well, they did do this and do that, and Shea, he's a first team All NBA talent and top five, and like finished in the top five in the MVP voting. And Team USA didn't have that kind of talent. Like sure, Team USA had talent across the board, but when you go up against someone like a Shea, like a Luca, where they just change the geometry and the tempo and the cadence of every half court set they're in. Like, what can you do? You could try everything you want. You just tip your cap off to him, and to watch that up close and personal was a surreal experience. I hope it's not a once in a lifetime experience. I hope to get to watch him again live, and just watching Team Canada. Like, here's how I would describe Team Canada. They merged the aspects of what made Team USA historically great in international competition, the athleticism, the speed, how they control the tempo, But having someone like Jordi Fernandez coach them, they also have that beautiful half court, those beautiful half court sets where they have movement. They have those pattern sets. Uh, they also have those hints or those flashes of point five basketball. I'm sure we're going to get to talk about that too later on. And it's always been that merge where as someone who grew up watching Team USA, you kind of want that for them to, like, the athleticism, the speed. That's fun to watch, but you also want more pattern and structure to their half court offense. And I think Team Canada, I don't think they have like a 3-year commitment, if I remember
Yep.
correctly, but they also didn't have that much of a build up time too compared to the other teams. Say for Team USA, and to do that within that short period of time together, it's amazing, and it's also testament to how good of a job Jordi Fernandez did. So props to them. You can feel from how they talk about each other, from how Jody talks about his players, that they love playing for each other and they love playing for Canada, for their nation. So yeah, it's just that commitment to each other, I think, is the key to building that cohesion, that chemistry.
Having Jordy come in like 2 months before they were kicking things off, taking over for Nick Nurse. I know Nate Bjorkgren was there to help bridge the gap to some degree, but wow, very impressive coaching job. And as you mentioned, having Shea, the crazy thing about Shea through the Spain game, through Slovenia, through France, through the USA, is that he didn't miss a beat down the stretch in any of those games. And going shot for shot against Ant-Man, for example, because it was split up mostly between Ant and Austin Reeves. Reeves had quite a few shots. He made plays. Ant made some. But the difference down the stretch, really, of course, that was their incredible Bridges shot, which, like, wow. But having Shea not miss a beat, like every shot that needed to be made was made. Every advantage that needed to be created was created. And he did it in the pressure cooker of the smaller dimensions of the FIBA floor with the different rules. And he did it against defenses that were really keyed into playing to the strengths of the FIBA style. And he did it against, NBA level defenders who weren't exactly, having a strong FIBA style defense like America. And it's just very impressive performance. And then, as you say, having Dylan Brooks, have the volume and higher efficiency than Steph Curry, I mean, it doesn't hurt. And not something you can set your watch to, but certainly something you open your arms to. Joe, the thing I want to talk about most with you, and we'll talk about the Raptors, of course, but Chris Paul is on the same team as Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Jordan Poole, who I adore the way he plays basketball in a lot of ways. I understand why he's no longer a Warrior. I get it. But I just can you give me the rundown on the Chris Paul situation? Is he starting? How do you think he's going to be deployed? Do you think he's a good fit? All that kind of stuff.
Well, Chris Paul is Chris Paul,
Yeah.
and historically, every team he's been on, he's made better.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Paul is sure, you could point to the playoffs, like they're coming up short in every playoff series he's been in. But at least in the regular season, he's made winners out of teams he's been in. Even the Thunder, even in that bubble season. So you can't really deny that he makes teams better. He makes an impact. And I have no doubts that he'll do the same with the Warriors in the regular season. Now the question is, will he, yeah, like what you said, will he be starting? Will he start off the bench? To be honest, no one knows at this point. No one knows, maybe except Chris himself, maybe Steve Kerr. Um, if you ask me, starting him isn't the way, and I think most people like most people would say this. Like, you shouldn't start Chris Paul next to Steph Curry, not because of offense, because the offensive fit there, I think, is seamless. They're there's a possibility that the two of them together, you add Clay, you have Draymond there, Wiggins, you know, offensive rating might go through the roof, sure. But it's the defense that's the problem, obviously, because you can't have a 6 foot point guard and a 6'2" point guard starting next to each other in the backcourt. Not because, Chris Paul is a bad defender, although he's up there, getting up there in age. Not because Steph is a bad defender. It's because you're putting a lot of pressure on your backcourt to defend at the point of attack. And then, assuming you start Chris Paul, who are you going to have at center? Draymond. Draymond is someone who easily wears down the more you put him at the five and you put more responsibilities on his shoulder guarding those big, strong guys, the Nikola Jokic's of the world, the Joel Embiid's of the world. So it's not just on the effect is kind of trickled down where you're not just putting a lot of pressure on Chris and Steph to defend, and in the process you're tiring them out and they're not going to have much to contribute on the offensive end, especially with Steph. You're also putting a lot of pressure on Draymond and he's going to wear down. And, by extension, you're also putting a lot of pressure on Clay and Wiggins. And to me, that's just untenable for 82 games in the regular season. And especially with the new resting rules, you won't have much leeway and luxury to rest your star players. And, the obviously the best course of action is to have Chris be that super sixth man where he's going to man the second units and he's going to have hopefully he's going to develop chemistry with the likes of a Jonathan Kuminga with he already has a history with Dario Saric and someone like Trace Jackson Davis, the Warriors drafted him in the second round where he's undersized at 6'9" at the five position, but he also has this vertical athleticism and he's the only guy in the roster besides Kaminga who has above the rim capabilities. And Chris Paul, he's a polarizing player in lots of circles, but especially within the Warriors. And people have kind of accepted the fact that he's on the team, but if he starts, I think there's a there's going to be a lot of protests within Dub Nation, for sure. And Warriors fans are passionate, but they're also smart, and they know a disaster in like a recipe for disaster when they see it. And I think having Chris Paul start beside Steph defensively is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I am very excited for. I think Kuminga playing minutes with Chris Paul is going to be really good for Jonathan. I do like Kuminga's game a lot. I really like the fact that he can be, you weaponize his motion as an above rim threat. Like at his size, one of the number one above rim threats in the league as far as like mobility, catch radius, quick jumping. If Chris Paul can start to shift defenses slowly over the course of these possessions so that there's more gaps for Kuminga to attack, more space to run into and all that kind of stuff, I think hoping for a big year. You talked about that Thunder team that Chris Paul was on, that they were pretty good. 3 guard lineups were part of it, and it was Schroder, Shea, and Chris Paul. Schroder moves on from there, like the sixth man stuff, to Los Angeles, turns down, a fairly big contract. I think it's going to end up after he signed this contract with the Raptors, losing him, I think, $55-60 million, turning down that contract. But signs with Boston, goes to Houston, comes back to the Lakers. Now he's on the Raptors. He's the World Cup MVP. What do you think about Schroder? We just talked about, do you start Chris Paul? Do you put him on the bench? The Raptors, based on how they want to play, have a similar question, although maybe not as high stakes, about Dennis Schroder. Start or bench? Where would you rather see him coming off of?
It's a good question, actually. The high of the World Cup, a lot of people would say he should start, right?
Right.
But there's also this conundrum where he's not exactly the kind of lead guard you'd want to establish your Darko Rajakovic. He's a European. He has a strong European pedigree, obviously, where he preaches point five basketball, ball movement, player movement. Uh, the ball doesn't necessarily run through the point guard at times. There's hubs on the elbow and up top delay. Um, Dennis is not necessarily that kind of guy where you tell him to just move off the ball, keep set screens for people off the ball. he wants the ball in his hands as much as possible. If I remember correctly, I remember a stat, Germany and him among all guards in the World Cup. I think he had like the eighth or seventh highest usage rate. So Germany ran his their offense through him a lot. And if you're Rajkovic, if you're Darko, you kind of if you're starting Dennis, do you consider kind of bending your principles a bit to cater to Dennis? Although, in my opinion, if you're gonna bend your principles to someone like Dennis, it's got to be in the context of, will that be enough for us to succeed? Will it be enough for us to reach the playoffs, for example, or to get deep in the playoffs? And for a team in the Raptors position where getting to the playoffs is like kind of like a ceiling in and of itself,
It would be meaningful if they got there.
yeah,
Totally.
it would be really meaningful. I think if you're Darko, you have to kind of establish your culture and the way you want to play in your first year as head coach. And Dennis, to me, I mean, I like how he plays. Like, no offense to him, but I don't think that's the approach that you'd want to take in your first year as head coach. So I don't know.
Also,
Like,
let me ask you a question. Does his performance at the World Cup impact how you view his NBA play style? His NBA performances, his impact? For me, not
honestly,
really.
yeah, honestly, not really. I mean, FIBA's a different game
Yep.
than the NBA. The roles are going to be different. Never mind the difference in rules, the difference in physicality, the court dimensions, and whatnot. I don't think it should affect how he's viewed in the NBA. I mean, give credit to him for his FIBA performance, but
Yep.
the NBA is, another thing, whole another thing. And you know, if Dennis wants to buy in to Darko's philosophy, that's great. And you can't really know for sure until you either see the on-court product or you're involved internally in the discussion, so no one really knows except for them. But based on Dennis's history, maybe I should explore, like, if I were Darko, I should explore maybe not starting him.
Yep. I
You know,
think I think the best thing about Dennis is the fact that like he can take those on ball reps. He's a good guard. Like he's a good guard in the NBA and
yeah,
he's on the mid-level exception. Not many teams that have like these playoff hopes are running out their lead ball handler as a mid-level exception guy. Now, of course, he can ascend past that. We talked about, FIBA, he played very well. That's his accolade. Those are his accomplishments. That's something he'll remember forever. And like, hell yeah. But the thing is that there's going to be more shooters on the Raptors bench. They might be able to play a little bit more free flowing and they won't have to be as specific about spacing as they'll have to be with that Siakam, Barnes, Pirtle front court that doesn't have as much spacing. You'll have to be really particular offensively. It makes a lot of sense if you want to toe the line between giving Schroder enough on ball possession so that A, he's like happy in his role, and B, that you're leveraging his best skills. You put him on the bench to run with guys who need somebody on ball. Whereas in the starting lineup, if you're going to move off of Fred VanVleet, if you're going to discuss Pascal Siakam in trades, and you're going to position Scottie as the future. Scottie fancies himself as a point guard of sorts. The franchise is willing to say, like, hey, we'll give you a shot at it. Give him a shot at it then. Like, put Scottie at point guard, let him run the offense. And if it turns out good, great. If you have trouble, you have recourse down the line to kind of restructure. But I think Schroeder, mid level exception, could have a really, really strong season as the lead guard off the bench. That's kind of my view of it, I suppose.
it's kind of similar to the Chris Paul situation, where
Yeah.
you kind of have like, of course, with the starting unit, you're gonna have the usual motion offense. You're gonna have the point five basketball, Steph Curry wreaking havoc off the ball. You run your offense through Draymond at the elbows and the post, etc., etc. But then you insert Chris Paul in the second unit, your offense totally changes into like a spread pick and roll, where you have Kaminga setting screens, you have Dario Saric popping out, you have Chase Jackson Davis rolling to the rim. It's kind of like that where you can have this middle ground between having your typical philosophy if you're Darko, and then you insert your lead guard in who can have lead ball handling reps and score, create. I think there's a middle ground to be had there, where and a compromise too, where Dennis, go do your thing with the bench, and then when Scottie and Pascal are in this starting unit, that's where you implement your usual philosophy of movement and having Scottie be that focal point. And hopefully for Scottie, he's improved somewhat his scoring and his ability to be a threat as a scorer, maybe in the post or in isolation, because that kind of advantage creation will go a long way towards your playmaking ability. And
Hmm.
that's the one thing I want to see from Scotty is being more of a scoring threat so that his playmaking abilities you know, will go to another level. And last season that didn't really materialize, and I think this season that's one of the things I'm looking forward to, especially with Darko at the helm.
So this was the kind of the funny thing. Darko has had, as far as coaches getting hired in the NBA, upon being hired, there's not many coaches you can go listen to on podcasts about how they install an offense. There's not a lot of coaches you can listen to do like 3 hour Q&As about like what they think about development, all this kind of stuff. Like the tape on Darko and his thoughts is out there. He's written articles with Quinn Snyder, like on the pick and roll. And so, but none of it covered defense. So at, his introductory press conference, I asked him about the defense and he says, don't worry, he says, we'll talk about the X's and O's later, but the defense is going to be good. When you look at that, the nucleus of the Raptors, Pirtle, OG, Pascal, Scottie, despite not being the type of defender many people thought he might be, like this lockdown wing defender, he's more so, in space, helping in rotation. Um, they had a really strong defensive finish to last season. How good defensively do you think this Raptors team will be given their personnel?
I mean, it has top 5 potential in my
Hmm.
opinion, but like one of the things that struck me about the Raptors defense under Nick Nurse was, how willing they were to bend or break some of the traditional defensive
Sure.
rules. In the NBA, you hear like you never help off the strong side corner. Well, we'll help off the strong side corner and we'll still have a pretty good defense with it. And that's one of the things I love watching about the Raptors is, they're not going to stick to what you think is should be done defensively, and they're still going to be good at it. Um, but the thing about their defense is it also feeds into what their offense looks like, where they weren't necessarily the best half court offense in the league
Bottom
for
five, two
they
years
have
in a
yeah
row. Yeah.
they haven't been the last 2 years. And you're always going to be you're you're always going to be rushing back in transition and trying to set up your half court defense. And sure, they're good at that, but at some point you gotta have a good half court offense for the other team to keep taking the ball out of the basket. And I think that'll take their defense to another level if they improve their offense. Um, like I think if I remember correctly, they had one of the highest corner three rates last season.
Oh yeah, big time.
Opponent corner three rates, and you know to me, I think that's the one metric I'm looking out for. If they reduce the number of corner threes that opponents take, I think that's a huge improvement. Darko, I don't necessarily know what his philosophy is going to be on defense, but I think for me, it's safe to say that he's not going to be as adventurous as Nick Nurse in terms of helping off the corners,
Yep.
in terms of being aggressive. Um, but if he wants them to be aggressive, they have the institutional knowledge to be aggressive. And I think having those kinds of players where you have, for me, Jakob Pertl, having him is the key to unlocking your half court defense, because he just like I'm looking to see if they play more conservative coverages, and I think Jakob is the key to that. He can play drop. He can go up to the level of the screen. He can protect the rim. So I think having him, they can afford to be more conservative with their coverages. They won't have to be in rotation as much. But that's just me assuming that Darko will play mostly conservative coverages. So you really don't know what we're gonna see until Darko does his thing on the court, until we see the on court product. So that's one of the things I'm excited to see.
That was when I asked him about it, he mentioned like his tenets. He said we're going to protect the rim, we're going to limit corner threes, and that's kind of where he went. It seems a lot more traditional in that you want to keep the shots above the break for weaker shooters, and you want to funnel stars into the mid range with a good rim protector in between them. And to his credit, Nick Nurse, despite getting fired, and I talked with Jackson Frank about his future with Philadelphia. That'll be another episode, obviously. But the Raptors, once they got Pirtle last year, I think they were fifth or sixth in defensive rating from then on till the end of the season, and they did allow less corner threes, and they were a lot better defending the paint, as you could surmise. You would assume would happen once you replace the collection of Barnes, Siakam, you know, Achua, like these types of guys with Pirtle. And I think that for the first time in a long time, the Raptors will have, as you say, the institutional knowledge to go to some of the more aggressive blitzing packages for however long that time. They'll be able to play some zone, but they'll have a strength in the more conservative packages. And really good defenses in the NBA aren't one note. They can do a few different things. And the Raptors, despite having really good defensive stretches in both of the last couple years, underperformed their defensive talent on the whole because they were one note types of defenses. To get to the offensive side of the ball, they're going to have to get out in transition. They're going to have to offensive rebound a lot, despite Darko Rajakovic being the new coach, and he's going to implement things he believes that maybe Nick Nurse didn't, and he's going to change things that Nick Nurse did that he does. Still, the personnel on the roster points towards at least some overlap there, like the offensive rebounding. But, as an X's and O's guy, what would you like to see them lean on for that advantage creation? Because as you mentioned, the Warriors are it's Steph Curry's offense, yes, but Draymond Green is like, checking the boxes like, okay, this is here, now we do this. I make the decisions here. Steph Curry makes it go, but it's like Draymond's driving the car through, I don't know. I don't have to create an analogy for it. It's fine. But what are you trying to do to make it easier for Scottie Barnes to be like the checklist guy who makes the right pass at the right time on target, the same way that Draymond does, as he's been one of the best playmaking bigs in NBA history?
Well, I already mentioned the fact that Scotty kind of needs to improve as a scoring threat. But it's also a two-way street, where you know if you're going to implement a motion offense or an point five basketball, and an offense where you're not necessarily gonna have the ball in your guard's hands, but someone who's in the low post and on the elbows, you kind of want the other players to keep moving themselves, where
Yeah.
they set screens, they make themselves available at all times, and they don't just stand there and stare at, for example, Scotty or Pascal trying to create in the post. um like Darko, that's why I like where I draw the parallels between Darko and Steve Kerr, where it's not an apples for apples comparison. Darko doesn't have a Steph Curry in his first year as a head coach, but you kind of want the buy-in to be there right away, where you tell your players, come on, like, we have to work as a team. And I guarantee you, if we work as a team, if you set a screen for this person, like Dennis, if you set a screen for this person, Scotty's gonna find you on those slips, on those cuts, or if you pop out, he's gonna find you in the corner or on the wing. And Scotty, if you like to pass, I guarantee you, if Dennis sets the screen or if Pascal sets this, I don't know, like snug ball screen for you in the post, you're gonna have an easier time creating advantages, and it's either you're gonna score, it's either someone on the opposite corner is gonna be there, um, and then maybe someone else, maybe for example, Otto set a hammer screen on the weak side corner, and then if you set a hammer on the weak side corner, the defense is gonna collapse on the corner shooter, and you're gonna pop out toward the wing, and you'll be open. And so for me, it's just the messaging that Darko is going to approach, like the kind of messaging that he wants to tell his players, hey, everyone's going to eat. I guarantee you, if you have the ball in your hands, you're going to eat, whether it's an assist, whether it's a score. And then if you have the ball in your hands, that'll empower you more to play defense on the other end. So, it's for me, it's just how, like, the Steve Kerr experience where he preaches energy, like having the ball is figuratively a ball of energy, and the more people that get to touch the ball, the more that energy gets transferred and spread around. So, you know,
Well, that there was that
the
great
Raptors,
Steph Curry quote where he was like, "The worst thing you can do is stand still.
yeah, the worst
Always
thing you
do
can do is stand
something."
still.
Yeah,
Yeah, so for me, the Raptors, they have problems. Like they have problems, like other problems to solve, like shooting,
yeah.
spacing, uh but for someone who's like a rookie head coach, first year, trying to implement his philosophy within the team, I think that shouldn't be a problem that you're worried with initially. It's trying to implement your system and trying to make your players buy into what you want to try to do. And if Darko does that to a pretty reasonable degree in his first year, I think that will be a success. And everything that comes with that is gravy. It's a bonus. So, if you're Darko, if you just want to, like, if you point five basketball, everyone keep moving. If you manage to do that, like, if there's like a metric that displays that success, whether it's passes per game, assists per game, and whatnot, then I think that's a good way to start your tenure as head coach.
I understand the rationale for why the Raptors, like, I didn't like how the Raptors played offense, but I understand why, with the limited amount of shooting and the amount of offensive rebounding they wanted to go for, why they position themselves as like, we're led by Pascal and we'll attack open spaces off of the doubles and gaps he receives. And so be really intentional about like shaping up off the ball as shooters and prepare for offensive rebounding. But it seems like the inherent advantage that wasn't ever, tackled or used by the Raptors was the fact that if you have a litany of 6'8" and up guys who all register as above average to elite finishers and can offensive rebound once they're going downhill, is that why isn't there more work being done to get these guys downhill? It doesn't have to be from 8 feet and in, but like on the catch from 17 feet and in, downward motion, putting pressure on the defense like that. There wasn't a lot of cutting. There's not a lot of movement in the Raptors offense in the Nick Nurse, like only when Kyle Lowry was there, because Kyle Lowry was, the orchestrator, like the maestro, the genius who ran perfect offense everywhere he went. Like it would manifest in the shot chart, it would manifest in the efficiency, it would manifest in everybody's stat lines. But once he left, it was pretty rote, it was pretty basic. And, if you have guys like Precious Achua, Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, even Jakob Pertl, who's really strong in the short mid range with these pop shots, and then obviously his footwork to get to layups is tremendous. Why you don't have more guys catching in motion downhill, even with the spacing problems, that was always something that I was kind of like, I don't understand why this isn't used as much. And I think that if they're going to, punch above their weight offensively, the cutting and finishing off of cuts and that breeding that motion throughout, that'll be something that definitely helps motivate more wins on that end of the floor. That's something I just really hope to see. Last thing I want to talk about with you is the Warriors. We talked about it, they were the defending champs when we talked last year. They I don't think their championship window has closed. Some people think it has. But of course, some people had no idea it would happen in 2022. How do you feel about the championship window right now?
I think it's there. I think it's still there. I mean, the key has always been Steph Curry.
Hmm.
For me, as long as you can build a team around Steph Curry, and that is contingent on the fact that Steph is still, at 35 years old, he's still one of the top 3 players in the NBA. On any given night, he can be the best player in the NBA. You know, the, they revolve around Steph Curry, and once that ship starts to break down, then maybe that's when you can say, oh, you know, maybe it's time to close the book on this Warriors dynasty, so to
So
speak.
Curry is a contention window in himself. Like that's the
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, once you have like an all-time great and top 3 NBA talent like that, yeah, that's a no-brainer. He's the guy that will take you to the title if you surround him with the pieces that he needs to take you there. And that's not to take away from Clay and Draymond, who they didn't necessarily have, like, Clay didn't have the best playoffs last season, but he had a good regular season. Like, he shot really well. He shot arguably the best regular season of his career. Draymond, his offensive, his scoring isn't trending up, and I
Yeah.
don't think it'll trend up. But he's still one of the best defenders out there in the league. Like, one stat that stood out to me with Draymond is that he was third in opponent rim field goal percentage,
Yep.
and the only ones that beat him are Brooke Lopez and Jaren Jackson Jr.
He's
And
incredible. The way Draymond has figured out to continue impacting defense at like you can see his athleticism completely sapped, especially by the way that he won't fill offensive gaps or pressure the rim because he's just like, I can't do it. But the fact that he still navigates that lack of pop defensively to the point where he's one of the best people at blowing up, at the like screen coverage stuff. He's one of the best help side defenders, and he's one of the best, like, if he's stepping up to the nail. I don't know how he does it, man. He's got a wingspan, yeah, but geez, he is a wizard.
yeah,
Blows my mind.
like, uh, like, to me, Draymond is the litmus test of people's knowledge of basketball.
Sure.
Like, if you think Draymond is, like, still one of the best in terms of defensive versatility out there, then to me, ball. It's fair to knock him on his offense, but you can't deny that he still contributes a lot of impact on the defensive end of the floor. And but yeah, that being said, the 3 of them, they're not exactly getting any younger. Um, you know, they have around 2 to 3 good years left in them, and this Chris Paul experiment really, it's gonna it's gonna say a lot about them this season, how they handle that experiment. So, you know, at the end of the day, the bottom line is, with the Warriors, it's Steph Curry and how long he can go, and everyone else around him, how they can continue to be those kinds of supporting roles, how they can contribute to winning a championship. And this season, I would place them just outside of the top tier. Maybe if you place the Nuggets and maybe the Suns as the best of the best in the West, the Warriors are just on the cusp of that. They're from the outside peeking in, and they can easily, if they have a good start to the season, they can easily break that barrier and insert themselves into the conversation. Um, but as easily as they can break into that top tier, they can also as easily fall far
Sure.
from it, because Steph is 30, turning 36. He can be injured. Chris Paul too. Draymond is Draymond breaks down easily the more you put pressure on him, as we talked about earlier. Clay, uh, you know, he's had 2 lower leg injuries, and he's turning 30, and I think he's already 33 years old. So yeah, like if your biggest stars, if your biggest contributors are all north of 30, that's not exactly it's not, you don't exactly have the luxury of time.
Well, with that being said, are you disappointed with the recent draft history that was it 3 lottery picks, obviously Wiseman being second, like that they haven't been able to replenish not any one of the maybe Kuminga this year, let's cross our fingers. I like his game a lot, but not one of those guys has been able to step in and cement themselves as like, I'm such a staunch part of this rotation, starter or otherwise, that I help motivate winning minutes with and without these aforementioned stars. Like they haven't gotten really anything meaningful in impact. What have you made of their, I guess, recent drafting?
Yeah, I mean, you can't sugarcoat it. I mean, their draft history recently has been subpar. Uh, the Wiseman, the Wiseman gamble, it didn't exactly work out. Not, it wasn't all his fault. I mean, circumstances had like in COVID, injuries in his rookie year. So, they kind of did have some bad luck in terms of that. But yeah, I mean, they could have done much better, in my opinion. Um, you like the two timeline thing that has been discussed to death.
Yeah.
And suffice to say that did not work out. The only timeline that they needed to worry about was the current timeline they're in, the Steph Curry timeline. I've
Was it
always
was
been
that a
of the
bit
opinion
was that a
that
bit greedy, do you think?
I think
Like
so,
kind
especially
of
the
have it
Wiseman
both
pick. I
ways?
think,
Yeah.
I mean, hindsight is 2020,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think looking back, that was kind of like ambitious and greedy of Joe Lacob. I think Wiseman was a Lacob pick. But yeah, I mean, the good thing about the front office, the ownership, is that they're not afraid to cut loose, to admit that they kind of went wayward on one approach and then kind of recalibrate in turn towards the opposite way, the opposite approach. So that experiment did not work out. The two timeline thing didn't work out. Maybe the most successful person that they drafted that could be a bridge to the two eras, so to speak, or kind of contribute now is Kaminga, as you said, and also Moses Moody. I have to shout out Moses Moody because he's turning into a very promising player. Shown some flashes last year in help defense and in individual defense, one-on-one defense, which is kind of the thing where it kind of stonewalls him a bit in terms of his ability as a defender, but he's improving. Uh, the surprising thing about Moody is he's kind of the same, has the same dimensions as Draymond. He's
Hmm.
6'6" and he has a 7'1" wingspan, which is exactly what Draymond has. So he has a lot of potential as a defender. Um, the 3-point shooting is coming along well. He shot the ball well last season. Um, and it's for me, it's just a matter of putting them on the floor. And Steve Kerr, I think rightfully so, kind of got some flack for not putting Moses Moody enough on the floor, uh, for not putting Kaminga on the floor at times. Although some of it was justified because Kaminga didn't exactly have the best playoffs last season. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to them spent like seeing more time on the floor, especially Kaminga with Chris Paul. Uh, Moody and Kaminga, I think were kind of the two that, if you were gonna describe the two timelines as kind of like a train wreck, then Moody and Kaminga were the only two to come out of that alive and breathing. And we all thought it was gonna be Jordan Poole, but obviously that ship sailed and the punch didn't help a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, you can't deny that the punch affected a lot of what he was trying to do last season and also the team morale. So, you know, hopefully this season is more of a clean slate, can start anew, and there's hopefully we won't hear of any controversies in training camp or anything leading up to opening night. And that's what I'm excited to see, to watch, to see if that Chris Paul experiment can work. And I think personally, I think it'll work better than most people. It'll work better than most people think. I'm not exactly sure if it's enough to take them all the way. There's a good chance it will, but if things click, if things fall, like if luck is on their side, kind of like kind of like how they started the championship year 21-22, where they got off to a good start in the first 20 games, then yeah, they have a pretty good chance of making it all the way.
I think that the thing is though is I understand why people would initially scoff at the Chris Paul thing is because the Warriors weren't necessarily trading from a point of strength there. So you assume that what you're getting back, and I don't know, the dialogue really turned on Chris Paul. I talked with Aaron Edwards about the Suns, and there were a couple jokes at Chris Paul's expense. You know, a lot of it about transition layups, pace of play, etc. But I, as you mentioned off the top of the podcast, just Chris Paul wins minutes and wins games, and you hope that that translates for the Warriors. And Chris Paul, like some players that talented who've played that well for that long, they can have renaissances in the twilight of their career. Like they can just figure it out. We see it with role players, but we also see it with stars. This could be like maybe the last 2 or 3 years of Chris Paul's career. Maybe there is a slight shift to more of the Golden State style of play while still having Kerr and Co kind of appease some of his ball handling wants with more of I expect the same way you do, like off the bench stuff. Any parting shots before we get out of here, Joe?
Yeah, like you know, last season I watched a lot of Raptors basketball, and I mean, can't help but be disappointed with their performance last season. Um, but yeah, I mean, they're gonna be on my league pass. My league pass list too this season, just because of how Darko Rajkovic, his philosophy, especially on the offensive end, is very, very similar to what the Warriors have been doing for the past decade. And I'm looking forward to watching the Raptors do their thing, how they navigate the new coaching staff, how Scottie improves as a player. Also monitor Pascal Siakam because he might be a future Warrior. uh, but
he would
ju-
he next to Curry is that's seamless, I
yeah,
think. Yeah.
yeah. But jokes aside,
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm just looking forward to the NBA season. Uh, you know, we've like especially the Warriors. Like you're not used to the Warriors bowing out of the playoffs early, so kind of had more time to like be more relaxed in terms of coverage. And to have no Warriors basketball for months is not a hasn't been a common feeling. So I'm looking forward to watching and covering the Warriors again. And the NBA, I think for me, nothing beats the NBA. The FIBA is nice, but there's nothing like the NBA. So just really looking forward to opening night and covering the NBA and just be as a basketball fan, just watching the best basketball in the world,
Mhm.
be played. Noah Lyles, shout out. But yeah, I mean, I'm just looking forward to the NBA season.
Yeah, man, it's the last 10 years. You can't get close to telling like 60% of the NBA story without mentioning the Warriors. It's just their fingerprints have been all over everything. They dominated the first half with LeBron fitting in just a smidge, the Raptors fitting in just a smidge, and then even in the era of incredible parity, the Warriors and Curry, they still find a way to get back in there, and they might do it again this season. I'm really, you talk about watching the Raptors a lot this season. I'm sure we'll have a mid-season check-in. I'll make sure I see quite a bit of the Warriors as well, so it can be a more conducive conversation. Joe, thank you so much for your time. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Lots more of these to come. And shout out to everybody. I hope you have a safe night, safe morning, whenever you're getting into it. We'll see you.